London says berating people to return to the office is counterproductive as the government continues to encourage people to work from home less often.
But last month, Sadiq Khan said that empty offices are a big problem for central London. So how does he suggest we strike the right balance? Well, he joins us now from Westminster. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Mr Mayor, so we're in a really difficult position, aren't we, as a country, but London in particular, which was the sort of epicentre of the virus at its worst in the first stage of the pandemic back in March, April, and suffered certainly the worst by far in the country, but now has very few hospitalisations, very few deaths, and many Londoners are going or trying to go about having as normal life as possible. And yet, a lot of people clearly, for whatever reason, have decided that working from home, for example, is maybe the new normal. And that's going to have a huge impact on the City of London, isn't it?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with anything that you've said in your intro. Look, Londoners have made monumental sacrifices over the last few weeks and months, which is why we've managed to bring the numbers of people with this virus down. And we're not seeing the increases in London, thankfully, that we're seeing across the country and across the world. In my view, we should treat people like adults and be honest with them. And we've got to recognise that it's a balancing act. On the one hand, we want to increase economic activity. That means returning to offices where it's safe to do so. On the other hand, we've got to protect public health. And it's really important we don't think simply by shouting at people or threatening them that's going to somehow lead to people returning to the offices when we know that the government's testing system isn't fully functional. The test, trace and isolate isn't properly working, but also we know the government's planning for a potential second wave that's going to be even bigger than the first one.
Look, Mr Khan, I totally agree on the testing system. It's not working in the way it should. Do you think that offices, employers, businesses should be regularly testing employees? Is that a good use of public money? Because in my view, that is the way to get people back to work. You can't currently run a fully staffed office or even run a fully, a full bus or tube because of social distancing. Is testing the way out?
Absolutely. You've seen we've managed to have Premier League football returning. We've managed to have Test cricket and T20. The way sport's been able to return is by testing, testing, testing. And one of the things that I've been told by Londoners regularly is they ask for a test and they've been sent to the Isle of Wight or they're being sent to Cardiff. That's not the way to engender confidence. So you're absolutely right. Test regularly, test often, but also make sure the results come back quickly as well. The other part of the jigsaw is those that have been asked to quarantine or self-isolate for 14 days, many of them are on 0-hour contracts. If they're not working, they're not getting paid. By quicker tests, by quicker results, they can be tested. If they're okay, they can return to work, and that will lead to more of us following the rules.
And do you mean people coming in on planes and testing at airports, for example? Because currently the two-week quarantine is, it's giving individuals personal responsibility. And as you say, there may be economic consequences of that for them.
The both of you raised this with me back in April about this nonsense where people were flying back from some parts of the world, jumping on the tube, going on a bus, coming into central London without being tested. And we saw other cities in the world where at the airports people being tested. What I would like to see is people being tested twice when they arrive back in our country, whether it's in Gatwick, Heathrow, Stansted City or elsewhere across the country. Firstly, on arrival, but because we know this virus has an incubation period for 3 or 4 days, test them again after 3 or 4 days, and that way, rather than that person having to quarantine for 14 days, which is really damaging for them, for their business, for their family life, they can return to work and return to their normal life after 4 or 5 days.
And have you discussed this with the Prime Minister? Because I know when you were last on, you mentioned that you hadn't spoken to him for a significant amount of time, which we found astonishing, although not that astonishing because he won't talk to us either. But when was the last time you spoke to the Prime Minister?
The last time I spoke to the Prime Minister was at the last Cobra meeting, and the last Cobra meeting was on the 10th of May earlier this year.
I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? The mayor of the capital city of his country has no dialogue with the Prime Minister during a global pandemic. For 4.5 months.
Well, can I just say to the Prime Minister's people who I know do watch this programme, it's not about, me getting one over on Boris Johnson. It's about us discussing, working together to find solutions to make it manageable to get through this virus. And by the way, I think testing ideas, testing policies leads to better policies and better ideas. If you have group thinking and are surrounded by yes men and yes women, what that leads to is nobody challenging you or questioning you. And I think that's the bad way to go about government.
Well, I agree. On the question specifically of the tube usage is down 70% year on year, even now. I've got to be honest, I don't mind going to, a restaurant, particularly if they have the sort of windows open and whatever, and there's social distancing and so on. I have got a problem in my head, not that I use the tube a lot, but I have a problem with going underground into a big tin can for an extended period of time. I think a lot of people have that slight issue. It seems to be one of the sort of more high-risk things that you can do. What can you do to persuade people to get back on the tube? How safe do you think it is?
Well, firstly, you're articulating a rational fear that Londoners have. And let me address that head on. So Transport for London has some of the world's leading enhanced cleaning regimes anywhere. We use hospital-style antiviral disinfectant. We have hand sanitizers available throughout the network. You're now required, at last, to wear a mask using public transport, but also we've made sure that this is being enforced. Our tube, our buses, our tram and our overground are as safe as they can be, but here's the but. I recognise that because of these social distance rules, we simply can't have the same numbers of people using our tubes, buses, trams, overground, particularly during rush hour, that we had before. That's why we've spoken to employers, and good employers have been staggering their start and end times to avoid the rush hour. That means you can use the tube or other forms of public transport, and you won't be cheek by jowl like you were before this pandemic began. But additionally, we've laid on additional safe, segregated cycle lanes, made it easier to walk. So if you don't want to use public transport, you can walk or cycle and find other ways to get to work, or you can work from home if it's the sensible thing to do.
All right, London Mayor Sadiq Khan, we appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Stay safe.